Good afternoon and welcome to another Reliability Roadmap web workshop. My name is Terrence O'Hanlon. I'm the publisher at Reliability Web and Uptime Magazine. It's my pleasure to be your host and your moderator for today. If you are looking for the web workshop interpreting PAS-55, Section 4.2, which deals specifically with the asset management policy, delivered by James Nesbitt, who's a principal service delivery at Asset Performance Group, then you are absolutely in the right place. Before we begin, we want to take a moment to ask you to request your free copy of Uptime Magazine for maintenance and reliability professionals, available free online, but you do have to ask at www.uptimemagazine.com. Also, come down and meet reliability and maintenance experts like James Nesbitt at Solutions 2.0. We've got the 25th International Maintenance Conference put together with the Operations Performance Summit. Very key, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit with the asset management policy today. Operations and maintenance all on the same basic page, along with the Predictive Maintenance Technology Conference and Lube 2010. More information online at maintenanceconference.com. There are worse places in the world to be than Bonita Springs, Florida in November. Without any further ado, I am handing the presentation to James. James, you should have a dialog box up and full control of the presentation at this point in time.
I think I do. Can you see the presentation now?
Yeah, it looks absolutely stunning and perfect. Well done.
All right, well, that was seamless. Adam, I think you were going to start?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here. So hi, everybody. Welcome to the fourth webinar in the Asset Performance Group 6-part PAS-55 series. For those of you that haven't talked to me before, I'm actually Adam Grahn, the Principal for Business Development with the Asset Performance Group. And in this webinar, James Nesbitt, as Terry mentioned, who is our Principal for Service Delivery, is going to do a deep dive into Section 4.2 of the PAS-55 specification. So as Terry mentioned, we also have him on the line. He's graciously offered to lend his expertise in hosting and moderating this webinar, so we really appreciate Terry's participation, and we really encourage you folks to ask a lot of questions using the little Q&A tool or the little chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. Time permitting, of course, if we can't get to any of the questions that you've asked, we will follow up with you, so please make sure to put them in even if you think time's running out. After the webinar is completed, we will make sure to put the webinar up on our website at www.apgassetcare.com, and as well it will be on the reliabilityweb.com website for you to pass along to others or to review again. So before handing the reins over to James, I just wanted to take a couple seconds to introduce those of you that have not worked with us before to the Asset Performance Group. Our organization has been around since around 2003. And the intent of our organization is to help equipment managers, people like yourselves, who are responsible for improving cost or operational performance or equipment knowledge and understanding in your organizations to implement sustainable improvements. You know, we're part of a global network with organizations such as those seen on the bottom of your screen. And one important note is that we do take a toolbox approach to delivering results with people. So PAS-55 is an excellent framework for building programs or asset management programs and helps us to guide the selection of the tools that I just mentioned. You know, we're especially happy to be able to tell you today that we formalized our relationship with the Institute of Asset Management, which administers the PAS-55 specification, and we are officially part of the first group of endorsed assessors for the specification. So we're really proud of that. I wanted to come on here and tell all of you guys about that. You know, we'll be making sure to put out you know, information about that as well. But we are part of that first group of endorsed assessors, so you know, that's a great thing. We hope you'll find this webinar enjoyable, thought-provoking, and above all, we really hope that you'll find it useful as you go about your regular work. So without further ado, I'll pass the presentation over to James.
Thanks, Adam. As Adam mentioned, what we're going to look at today is really a deep dive into just one aspect of the PAS-55 specification. If you take a look at the webinars that we've done, we've had a good mix of overview of specific elements of the specification, as well as some case studies and a business case for PAS-55. So this is part of the evolution based on some of the feedback that we got to just do a deeper dive into some of the elements. So you'll see that as part of our PAS-55 series as well. So today we're going to look at just a brief overview of PAS-55 for those of you who are unaware or haven't seen the specification before. And then we're going to talk about the policy, and the rest is really related directly to the policy around who should develop the policy, the 11 elements of the PAS-55 4.2. Now 4.2 within PAS-55 is the asset management policy piece, and there are 11 elements or 11 points that define what a policy should be. We're going to talk about policy structure, and then we're going to go through an example of an actual policy to take a look at the 11 elements in play. We're going to talk a little bit about functional policy or additional policies that you may need, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. So, with the publicly available specification. The publicly available specification was developed by the Institute of Asset Management and is administered by the British Standards Institute. Now, it is not a standard, it is a specification. But you will see me calling it a standard probably several times in this presentation because I always seem to stumble over that. But every time you hear me say standard, insert specification. It was originally published in 2004 as a requirement specification, and Part 2 is the implementation guidance, which takes the first part and really gives you some framework, some ideas, some guidance to the application of the standard. The last update was in 2008, and right now there's 50 organizations and 15 industry sectors in 10 countries that provided input to that update. Now, another update on the specification is that they've just got the go-ahead to do the ISO preliminary work. So it looks like they've been unofficially given the ISO 55000 series, and they fast-tracked the preparation for the ISO work, and now they've been given the go-ahead to begin assembling the international team that will develop the ISO standard for asset management, which of course will be built directly onto as a result of and including a lot of the content from PAS-55, because it's a lot of the same people that will be involved. So what is asset management? When we're talking about asset management, we're talking about the coordinated activities and practices to which an organization sustains its assets, takes care of the assets that provide a value back to the organization. We're not talking specifically about the maintenance group, which is where it's often confused, where it's often placed. We're not talking about just reliability or operations. We're talking about the whole life cycle of the assets. So from acquisition to utilization, maintenance, and finally asset recovery. So the entire life cycle of the assets. When we're talking about an asset management system, this really defines where PAS-55 fits into your organization. So at the top we have the organizational strategic goals, and when we're talking about strategic goals, and we're going to talk about that a lot this morning, this afternoon, depending on where you are. What we're talking about is the business plan, the charter, the balanced scorecard. Where is the organization going? From there, PAS-55 develops what they call the asset portfolio. What assets are subject to this goal or are going to contribute to this goal? Of that portfolio, what are the systems, and then within those systems, what are the assets, the individual assets? Talking about an asset management system, most organizations will strive to have an integrated asset management system. However, if you're a very diverse organization and you have a number of different business units that have an entirely different business model, so if you have oil refineries, and you have gas transmission, and you have electrical generation in both regulated and unregulated markets, you may have a number of different asset management systems because they'll have different strategic goals and they will have a different policy for their asset management activities. So typically one can be many. If we look at the key principles and attributes for success, so PAS-55 looks at an integrated approach that looks at all of the elements. It's holistic, it's risk-based, it's optimal. One of the things I like to point out is that PAS-55 outlines what needs to be done, not how. Rarely do they say you must do this or dictate the detail that needs to be done. For the most part, they understand that there's distinct differences across industries and even competitive differences within industries that are going to make some practices good for some organizations and maybe not the best for others. So what they recommend are good practices, and it's up to you to define how you're going to comply or get there. This is another view, really, of the pyramid. So if we look at the top, we have the organizational strategic plan, the vision, the mission. And below that, the PAS-55 steps. So the first one, of course, being policy, which is what we're going to talk about today. Policy connects, really, the strategic plan to the strategy, objectives, and asset management plans. The strategy, objectives, and asset management plans is really where the rubber hits the road. How am I going to manage my assets? How am I going to measure that? What objectives do I have for improvement or for sustainment or for growth or for acquisition or liquidation? What are my specific asset management plans? What are they for this year? What are they for 5 years from now? What's my long-range plan? And how does that all fit into the overall policy? And then, of course, the strategic direction. At the bottom, you can see that everything is focused on life cycle activities towards the portfolio of asset systems that you have defined. So again, acquisition, utilization, maintenance, and recovery. What we're going to talk about specifically today is the asset management policy. And again, it is the bridge. It is the bridge between the organizational strategic plan and the asset management strategy. It is the primary communication tool for the direction of asset management. Where are we going? What are we hoping to accomplish? It also provides the framework for asset management for the organization. So the policy doesn't detail exactly what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. It gives the framework for the direction the organization is going to move in. And then the other business units that have a stake in asset management or accountability around the asset management process will align their strategy to that policy. When defining the policy for asset management, you need to consider all of the drivers that are influencing or controlling the process. Human, information, financial, and even intangible drivers such as reputation and image need to be considered. When developing the policy for asset management, we need a clearly defined organizational goal. Now, the organizational goals are always built on these types of drivers. Right? What are my human needs? What are my process needs? What are my financial drivers? What does my business model look like? What is my information drivers? And again, some of my intangible drivers. I have been in organizations where they don't have a clear business plan or a clear direction. Sometimes it's just keep doing what we're doing better, faster, cheaper. My advice is that if you don't have clear organizational goals, clear organizational business plan, don't create an asset management policy, because it needs to be clearly linked to that. And it is absolutely critical that the organizational goals are clearly defined and agreed to before drafting any policy. Now, that being said, most organizations have a policy. It may not be clear, organizational goals. It may not be clearly written as here are our goals. It may take the form of a balanced scorecard. What are we measuring? It may take the form of a business plan. It may take the form of even a value statement. This is what's important to us as an organization. So who should develop the policy? This was a really easy slide. The policy for asset management needs to be written by the senior team responsible for its implementation. At the highest level of the company is responsible for asset management. Now, some companies have a vice president of asset management and others do not. So often the directors responsible for engineering, operations, and maintenance are tasked with its development. Now remember that asset management is a function. So if you don't have there's not an asset management department, and even if there is, we need to consider all of the stakeholders for the function: operations, maintenance, engineering, human resources, information systems. everybody who has a stake in the management of assets for that organization. On a lot of these webinars, I'm asked, well, where can this start? Can I do this at a grassroots level? Can I implement PAS-55 for a plant or within my organization? Now, PAS-55 is an excellent framework for asset management, and there are components of it where it makes sense, as long as you're fitting it into the framework, to start at a site level, to start at even a pilot or a smaller level, maybe with some practices, maybe with some processes, with just small elements of the PAS-55 specification. However, when it comes to the policy, that's not true. The policy needs to be driven from the top down. It needs to show very clear objectives, and it needs to show, above all, unwavering support from the senior team. This is the direction that we're going at, and we're all on board and supporting it. And we will support it in thought. We will support it in deed. We will give it the funding that it needs, and we will give it the resources that it requires. So it's important that it is top down. When you're developing the policy, you need to have somebody who is knowledgeable in PAS-55 there. If you have somebody with credibility internally, that's wonderful. If not, it's a short exercise. Get a knowledgeable third party who can guide you through the exercise. It will save you from falling in the pitfalls or traps associated to it. Poll question number 1. I guess this goes over to you, Terry.
Yes, it sure does. Bear with me. For the audience, how familiar are you with the PAS-55, specifically, not just PAS-55, Section 4.2, which is about the policies? Have you never heard of it? Have you heard of it but you haven't read it? Have you read it but you don't understand it? Are you comfortable with it, or have you already implemented it? So let's just take a moment. We can give it about 5 more seconds so we can get back to James. Okay, James, as far as how many people are familiar specifically with Section 4.2, the policy section of PAS-55, 16% on this call have never heard of it. 51% have heard of it, but they haven't read it. 11% have read it, but they don't fully understand it. 22% are comfortable with it. No one has implemented it, at least no one on this call yet.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks, Terry. Okay. PAS-55, the policy criteria. There are 11 elements, I call them, of the policy. Now these, and they're on the right-hand side of the screen there. You see 4.2, asset management policy. There's 11 elements, 11 points, A to K, and 2 notes. Now we're going to go into these in immense detail, and I'll show you examples of each of these policies. However, if we roll those up, they really fall into 5 broad categories, which are the themes that PAS-55 is looking for here. First one, of course, is consistency. Is the asset management policy consistent with the organizational strategic plan and other organizational policies? So it can't be conflicting. One thing you often see is, a real simple example is maintenance versus operations. Operations is as much production as is humanly possible, and maintenance is a reasonable maintenance strategy. So those are almost at odds, because operations in some organizations will often forego maintenance in order to continue to run. So they're not aligned. They're not consistent. Appropriateness. Is the asset management policy appropriate for the nature and scale of the organization? As I talked about before, is it appropriate for the asset management system? Are the portfolio of assets that are included reasonable and applicable to the policy that you are developing? Framework. Is there a clearly laid out set of principles and framework? Not necessarily the details around we're going to do business process mapping using 6 Sigma, but enough of a framework to give direction to the rest of the organization. Compliance. Is there a commitment at the asset management policy for the organization to comply with all relevant mandatory regulations and laws? I'm going to get into this one in a little bit more detail. And then continual improvement. Is there a commitment for continual improvement within the policy? Now, there's two of the elements that actually deal with the structure of the policy itself. The first one is pretty apple pie and motherhood. Be documented, implemented, and maintained. So the structure of the asset maintenance policy is defined by PAS-55. It simply states that it must be documented. However, we believe this needs to be formal. First, the policy should be printed on a quality material and posted and distributed throughout the organization. It should simply be the statement with perhaps the signatures of the senior team that shows support to its content. And in most organizations, I see examples of policies that follow this structure, that these are our values, this is our balanced scorecard, signed by the senior leaders of the organization. We also think that we also strongly recommend that it have a formal booklet that goes with it, much like the PAS-55 Part 2, that talks about in detail why do we have it, what is the intent of the policy. Give me some guidelines, give me some recommendations for the application of the policy. As outlined in the specification, one of the notes, the first note, is that organizations may choose to have two policies. One that is for internal use and could contain some confidential information. It should be written. It should be written so that it's usable to you, so that the language makes sense, and that it's applicable to your business. And it may include some confidential information. It may include competitive strategies. So you may have one for internal, and you may have a second one that is external that you're going to distribute to other stakeholders, vendors, the procurement group, the contract group, that sort of thing. We have another poll question. Carrie? I can see the poll is open.
Sorry about that, James.
No problem.
I have a new microphone, and my computer's rejecting it from time to time. We have almost 80% answering this. Apparently, they didn't mean me to read it to them. We'll give it about another 3-4 seconds. And we'll close that. Well, that's encouraging. 40% on this call do have a formally documented asset management policy. 60% do not. Yeah, that's great. 60% do not, though.
Oh. That's a lot higher than I thought it would be, Terry. Okay, back to the presentation. Second part around structure is to be communicated to all relevant stakeholders, including contracted service providers, where there's a requirement that these persons are made aware of the asset management policy related obligations. And I think because we always talk about regulatory compliance and we're always going to talk about continuous improvement, that contractors and vendors and your internal contract should always include the asset management policy. They will need to comply to it. They will need to understand it. We have seen many policies that fail to have any impact on the organization, and we attribute a lot of this to the way that they're communicated. It's not enough to just simply mail it out and post it onto the bulletin board. The specification details needs to be communicated to everybody who has a stake in the organization around asset management, internal asset managers, trades and operators, procurements and contracts, contractors and vendors. And we also have to take a look at the different learning styles that people have. So some people can get a memo, and that's good enough for them. I'm somebody who likes to have a presentation or some interaction about a new idea or concept before I really internalize it and organize and own it. Some people are comfortable with some online study to get their minds around it. But in addition to the initial communication, focus needs to be brought onto the policy once it's implemented. You can't just communicate it and forget about it. Reference to the asset management policy and its framework should be included in every business case for asset management going forward, status reports. And then ultimately, the key performance indicators for those who are responsible to execute against it should be related directly back to the policy. What are we trying to do? How does that fit our policy? Knowing that our policy is going to contribute to the organizational goals. Okay, we're going to take a look at an actual policy. This is an actual policy, but I've had to make some changes to it, both to conceal the company that it was done for, and to bolster it up, enhance some of the aspects of it so that it actually complied to the 11 elements within PAS-55. It's written at the asset management level and will serve as a good example. And we'll discuss during the presentation that there may be a need for additional policies, which are called functional policies, to further support the asset management policy. And we'll see how those fit in later. We're going to look at this in 3 sections. We're going to look at the scope, the framework, and the impact statement. These sections are not detailed in the specification. This is just how we lay it out, and we find it the easiest way to communicate the policy in these terms. So we have the scope statement, provides the link to the organizational goals. The framework, how will we reach those goals? And the impact statement, why are we doing this? And what will it mean to you? So the scope statement, I'm not going to read it now. I'll read it in pieces as we go through. The scope statement is critically important. Here the reader needs to quickly understand what we're trying to accomplish. The asset management policy should always begin with a commitment from top managers and needs to be aligned with the business objectives of the organization. You need to understand how the asset management policy and subsequently their role in it will contribute to the overall goals of the organization. So if I was reading this, I could say, okay, well, that's where we're going, and I think this is where I fit into it. So the first one is to be derived from and be consistent with the organizational strategic plan. I think we've said that a half dozen times at least this morning. We are committed to balancing the quality of life for our employees and maximizing the return on our shareholders' investments. So here we're talking about human people goals, and we're talking about shareholder investments or financial return. Be appropriate to the nature and scale of the organization's assets and its operations. So here we're going back to the PAS-55 asset management system. Have we defined the system well enough? Is the scope applicable to all of the asset management systems within our organization? Or do we have fundamentally different asset management systems that would require us to have a number of policies rather than try to group it under one umbrella policy? Now, it needs to include a commitment to comply with current applicable legislation, regulatory and statutory requirements, and with other requirements to which the organization subscribes. This is one of the rare times where PAS-55 actually says you must do this. They're not telling you what the good practice is. They're telling you the practice that you must comply to in order to comply with PAS-55. So in this example, in an efficient, safe, and environmentally responsible manner while maintaining compliance to all state and federal laws and regulations. So clearly in the policy statement, it must say that. Second section is the framework section. Now this is really where the rubber hits the road, right? This tells us how we're going to do it, how we intend to achieve the goals, and they must be clear and aligned, of course, to the operating to the opening statement. So the elements that are important here is to provide a framework which enables the asset management strategy, objectives, and plans to be produced and implemented. So the link between the objectives of the organization and the strategy and subsequently objectives and plans. So here we're looking at adopting a life cycle approach to asset management, consistent and integrated approaches, a visible commitment to safety and environment. Not telling us specifically what programs we're going to implement, what practices we're going to use, where it's important to start in our business unit or in our organization, but really just a framework around the direction that we're going to go and our key goals. Clearly state the principles to be applied, such as the organization's approach to health, safety, or sustainable development. So here I've highlighted some of the words. So operating and maintenance requirements, maximizing the return, a financial return to the organization. We're going to look across all of the assets, consistent approach. We're going to have an integrated approach, greater transparency, and we're going to include things like education, reporting, and elimination of unsafe or undesirable conditions. So here we're saying, we're clearly going to apply education. We're clearly going to apply, greater transparency, but it doesn't tell us how yet. That really is defined in the strategy later. The third section, the framework section. I'm sorry, we just did the framework section. The impact statement, pardon me, says why are we doing this? Why is the organization going down this path? And how does it align to other policies or values that we may have? So here, be consistent with other organizational policy. And we can see here that it's clearly aligned to core values around effective and accountable asset management that is central to sound financial management and sustainability. The health and well-being of our communities and our employees at the forefront of everything we do, and open and transparent asset management processes focused on the long-term needs of our employees, customers, and community. So clearly aligned to the core values of the organization. Include a commitment to continual improvement. So here again, PAS-55 is telling us what it must have, right? Not just telling us good practices, telling us what has to be included. So here, continual improvement in asset management and asset management performance. So long-term goals of the organizations, its employees, and its community, and the community. It is responsive to changing needs and continuous improvement while preserving the safeguarding resources for future generations. So looking at always getting better, always applying the best available practice or the best available technology. Be consistent with the organization's overall risk management framework. I like this impact statement because it talked of them, it wasn't specific to them. So it doesn't talk about this is the risk that we're willing to take, but it does talk about utilization and maintenance, employees and community, financial management and sustainability, long-term needs. All of these things would be part of any risk matrix that I have seen or have been involved in developing. And I jumped way ahead somehow. Compliance. Be reviewed periodically to ensure it remains relevant and consistent with the organizational strategic plan. Our advice is always to have a long-term plan. Now, a long-term plan to some organizations may be 3 years, it may be 5, it may be 10. But we like to have a longer-term plan that is reviewed annually. So living program is an essential part of the success. The policy should not be posted on the bulletin board or cubicle wall, only to be forgotten about or brought out when trying to win an argument. It needs to be part of everyday business, communicated both internally and externally. However, we recommend that the annual review should ask if this is still relevant or if there's been changes in the business plan or changes in the marketplace that would demand change in how we deal with our assets. Is Is there increased competition or decreased demand that may prompt us to take more risk? Have there been significant departmental changes or mergers or acquisitions that would affect the relevance of the document? The review should be conducted at the same level as it was created, and then often coupled with activities such as budget planning, so that we can show the appropriate level of support for our business goals once we have reviewed them and refined them as required. And finally, the last note, which I think I went over a little bit, is that organizations may have one or more functional policies relating to specific asset management activities. So if you have a aggressive capital investment strategy, if you're going to outsource maintenance and operations of your assets, if you're going to aggressively acquire other organizations or other businesses, those can be different policies to support this asset management policy. They follow the same structure, they follow the same criteria, however their scope is just a little more limited and more specific to that activity. We recommend that functional policies that are part of the overall asset management policy be included within the asset management documentation so that we have one place to go. Our final question.
Here we go. How familiar are you with your organization's asset management policies? It's not applicable because you don't have them. You've heard about them. You have seen them and could tell you where to find them, or you know them intimately and you helped or you were involved in their development. So give us an indication about how familiar you are with your organization's asset management policies. I'm going to give it 5 more seconds. Interesting, James. We have 30% say it's not applicable, they don't have them. We have 12% saying they've heard about them. We have 27% saying that they've seen them and they could tell you where to find them. We have 30% who know them intimately or help develop them.
That's interesting because we've got both sides of the spectrum there. We've got 30% who help develop them or know them intimately, and 30% who say that they're not applicable. And that's one of the biggest traps that we've seen, is that people get together to write a policy, and maybe they just don't want to do this every year, or they don't want to do it a whole bunch. So you end up with a great big flowery motherhood and apple pie statement that kind of covers everything sort of generically, and it's enough to say that we've done it, we posted it on the wall, and we forget about it, and we never have to review it again. That's one of the biggest traps that I've seen organizations fall into, and our advice, of course, is always, if it's not going to be real, if it's not going to be living, and if it's not going to be a part of how you run your business, spend your time doing something else.
Terrific. That's good. Good advice. Do you have a contact slide, just in case, James, that you can put up?
Yeah, right down there. If you look at apgassetcare.com, that's our website. Any requests for the presentation or additional questions or support you may need can be sent to info@apgassetcare.com.
Terrific. Well, thank you. Thank you for another well-attended and well-done PAS-55. You're schooling us this year on this, and that is extremely exciting news that there's an ISO committee now to bring this thing, even though you're right, it isn't strictly speaking a British standard. I think people really will favor it moving to an international platform at ISO.
Yes, yeah, there's been a lot of excitement around the announcement of the ISO standard.
And it's just to be clear, it's not done yet. It's what the exciting news is that they formed a committee to get it done. Correct?
Yeah. That's the exciting part. Is that the exciting part is that it's getting started. But what was really surprising is that they were able to fast track it. They were able to take an organization like the International Standards Organization and show enough value and enough interest in the asset management specification that they fast tracked the committee and the support towards it. So So that's really encouraging.
James, from one of our viewers here, they're basically stating that policies are not easy to write, not from the writing point of view, but more so from the watertight litigation point of view. What about a policy statement which may be easier to get through management, a policy statement rather than a policy?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to get done from it. From a PAS-55 perspective, I would say no. You need the policy, because what we're looking for is the tie between the organizational goals and enough of a framework to build my strategy, define my objectives, and develop my plans. Right now, a policy statement, in my mind, can make a lot of sense, but I've usually seen those on value statements or on a balanced scorecard, where you'll see the KPI or the measurement that you're trying to achieve, and you can kind of backwards engineer that to the objective you're trying to accomplish. Right. So from a PAS-55 perspective, it must be a policy, and it must contain all 11 of those elements. A statement just isn't good enough. But if we look at the specification around 4.2, it does talk about the need to write the policy with the understanding that it may be used in litigation. It may be used to show how your organization is diligent in their asset management policy, but it may also be used to show how you're negligent. So if you're going to write and publish a policy, you need to have the full support of the organization, and you need to walk the talk. You need to do what you say you're going to do. You can't just send the policy out there, because it could be used against you. I would be very interested to see, Terry, what BP's policy is on asset management around their BOPs, and whether that is going to be brought up against them in the days coming ahead.
Well, it is. We found some. We did, just quickly. Because don't get me started on that. But we did find some documents that they had actually presented at a previous petroleum industry conference about the issues with the blowout preventers. But so there was a lot of written documentation around it. A lot of very not looking great in terms of a litigation context. But that's for their lawyers to sort out.
That's right.
Well, so if somebody wanted to become an auditor for their company, would you recommend that they go through an ISO 9001 lead auditor type training?
Oh, absolutely. So if you're looking at auditor training generically, the ISO auditor training would be more than adequate. It would give you the skills that you need in order to audit the PAS-55 specification. But you do need to have a very firm understanding of the PAS-55, criteria and asset management performance measures that you're going to measure against in order to effectively assess PAS-55. You need to know what the criteria are and their intent and how to effectively implement them, or to see that they are effectively implemented. Right? So somebody waving a policy saying, "Hey, we have a policy, here it is, check it off," isn't usually good enough. You need to go into the organization, see that people understand it, see that people are aligned to it, see that it's part of what they do on their day-to-day activities. Did that answer the question, or did I answer several others?
You did great. Getting a little echo in the background there again. I don't know if there's something just changed, but will Asset Performance Group, will they train on assessment methodology? Will you help a company kind of become able to assess themselves if they had multiple locations enough to justify the effort?
Yes, yeah. So the assessment process is you can have a third party come in and give you an objective assessment. There's also a self-assessment that you can take. So by being a member of PAS-55, you can take a look at the criteria they have developed and assess yourself. We typically find this to be less than effective. Some of the assessment processes that we've followed in the past is to come in and do the initial one and set the standard, working with the organization to show them, what to look for, how to do the assessment, and then allow them to go out into their own organization and assess different business units, different plants, different sites. The value to that, Terry, is that going down the path, they can assess themselves to the same standard the initial assessment was done, to see where they're going, where are they making progress, sort of do a benchmarking or an acid test of the effectiveness of their initiatives.
And really, that's one of the beauties of the PAS-55 is it does also include. I mean, there's the ability to have a consistent assessment methodology across the enterprise.
Absolutely.
I'm going to read this question. I'm going to jump in on the answer only because I have this discussion with Ramesh Gulati about every 6 days.
Okay.
And then I'd like to get your read on it also. If this were an ISO standard, what might be the value vis-a-vis the ISO 9000 series? PAS-55 is deep. It seems like a company would not need to be burdened with meeting both. A deep corporate self-analysis in PAS-55 and ISO 9000 registration process is a lot of overlap, even if the intent of each program publication is not the same. Yes, I would agree with that perspective. That is coming from the rare company that will though both have a very comprehensive ISO 9000 approach to their management, their framework for their overall corporate management. But because you have ISO 9000 as a framework for your corporate management does not mean that you have included a comprehensive asset management policy that James is referring to in this type of a presentation. So although, yes, you are right, Ramesh Gulati, the person I'm referring to, works for a large facility, and they actually do just what you're referring to. They're not going to go down the PAS-55 route because they have an ISO 9000 framework, and they're quite knowledgeable and mature in their asset management practices, so they have a written asset management policy that certainly does comply with their ISO 9000 certification. In their case, your statement is correct. PAS-55 is semi-redundant. But I think in other cases, I've not really seen that as and James, I'd love you to comment. I've not really seen a lot of people with ISO 9001 that also have an extremely mature and comprehensive written asset management policy.
And I would agree with that statement as well, Terry, but I'd also like to offer is if you don't have an ISO 9001 standard in your organization today, and asset management is the forefront of your business, you rely on your assets in order to produce a product and subsequently a profit, that you may want to look at the asset management policy first before you go down the 9001 path.
And just to echo on top of that, they had to invent their own framework. In other words, they had to take it from their asset management practices and make sure it was very thorough, whereas PAS-55 is a pre-built framework. Correct?
Correct. So they would have some advantage to using the framework had it been available at the time.
Right, and in fact, that you're putting the nail on the head. They started going down this path before that was available, or before it was mature enough for them to use. Here, kind of apropos of the initial question that you were answering, in a litigious society like North America, I guess he's lumping Canada in there. I don't know if you're as litigious as we are. The legal downside is really apparent. Because as you mentioned, and it's quite clear to everybody here on this call, that's at least from this part of it. So what's the upside to PAS-55 compliance?
Well, remember, PAS-55 is to take a responsible, proactive approach to asset management. I think most organizations, regardless of the threat of litigation, do need to take a look and say, what's our vision for asset management? How are we going to manage the assets that are important to our organization, our future, our growth? Now, the policy that you've seen me write today, me review today, wasn't really written at a level that was any more than clear direction to the business units. So we didn't say, you shan't do this, you shan't do that. We said we will have a focus on safety and the environment. We will have a focus on sound financial return. We will have a focus on long-term perspective for our assets. Right? All of those are sound business principles and are a part of every organization that I've been involved with. This is just a way to formalize it and to start moving you down that road, making sure everybody is aligned and all of your decisions are aligned to that thinking process.
And so then the power in that, James, what you're saying is that part of the value of that, even though it didn't lay out the instruction manual of what was going to be done, the true value emerged from that process, because now everybody from top to bottom, like the diagram that you showed, was aligned. The process was extremely valuable because everybody has the same guiding framework that they can refer back to in terms of when a decision does have to be made. There's a framework for asset management decision making, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. And if I could maybe just build on that too, if you take a look on the other side of that, not having an asset management policy. So imagine if BP didn't have an asset management policy at all. How damning would that look in legal litigation, right? So you knew that you were dependent on these assets. You knew that there were safety and environmental impacts, and you did nothing.
Well, and the asset owners, the people who deployed the original capital on these assets, they have a desire for a return on their investment. The way you have a return on the investment is you manage those assets correctly. They didn't purchase the assets with the expectation and deploy them with the expectation that they would be poorly maintained and operated. They did it with the anticipation that they'd be well operated and well maintained, and a policy helps achieve that. So a policy is a good business decision. You can't run your business based on fear of litigation. You need to do good business. You need to do good business.
Right. That's exactly right. Their policy was not to, document so very little they could wash their hands of any responsibility. Right. Their policy was, as you said, responsibly manage their assets. Now, their performance towards that is questionable.
James, on the policy that you showed us that you're involved with, do you think that's going to evolve over time and become less, like you're saying, it's setting out kind of missions and visions and position statements and things of that nature? Do you anticipate it getting more specific over time, having things added to it, having maybe some things taken away from it? How do you anticipate this document maturing over time?
Well, this document, I think at a high level, this document is mature, and there's actually a booklet that I discussed a little bit that goes along with it that talks about the application of it. Right? Here's why we're doing it. Here's what we mean. Here's what we're intending to get from it. Right? Here's where we think the framework is going to take us. In order to drill that down any further, we really start to get into the strategy and objectives. So the next part of PAS-55 takes that and then drills it down really to a workable, to a tactical level where we can see things like, do this in order to get that result. We will implement this improvement. We will take this good practice and make it consistent across the organization. So this in my opinion, this is complete and adequate enough to drive down to the next level. Now, like I said, I grabbed this policy, and as I was going through it, I found that it didn't quite comply, and I had to add some words, and I had to add a section or two in order to make it comply. So I think it will change in order to comply, but at this level is where it needs to be.
Who was the booklet distributed to?
The entire organization. So everybody in asset management, so procurement, contracts, maintenance operations, and all the other managers or directors in the other departments. So human resources didn't each get a copy of the policy, but the manager and director certainly understood it.
So for the people on this call, imagine the power of that. I mean, you know, so how many of you are that connected with what you're doing in asset management decision making with the rest of your organization? I mean, you know, you can just imagine the tentacles of the implications of that, you know, stretching through the entire organization. And you know, as much as some of us think we want to work in isolation, the organization has one aim and it's one system, and now this gives us the opportunity for our world to kind of join the rest of that organization's world. I think that's terrific, James. That sounds really great. Do you anticipate that OSHA or other government agencies or regulating agencies adopting an asset management, adopting, you know, a favorable approach to an asset management framework similar to PAS-55 in future regulations, or, you know, is there any momentum in this area?
Yeah, I haven't seen any momentum in that area, and I'm not sure I would agree with that's where it needs to be. I think that OSHA and other regulatory bodies can certainly use it as a tool, and in my mind, the need or the driver for PAS-55 shouldn't come from a regulatory body, because in my experience, that just results in check boxes. Yep, I can say I did that. Yep, I can say I did that. It's not really implemented. It's not really owned by the organization. Although I can see it being a valuable tool for them to say we need these types of things, the need for the specification, whether it's the ISO or the PAS specification, needs to come from the company that's looking to more responsibly manage their assets, or from the customer who works with companies who provide them products to make sure that they are adequately maintaining or adequately managing their assets.
I think James is absolutely right with that. Again, we're kind of back to the reason you want to manage your assets is because it's good business to do so well. You know, which we tend to get lost in when it comes to policy and strategy sometimes. But at the end of the day, it's a business, and it either has a profit motive or a mission motive. And, you know, managing your assets well helps you achieve that. If I might just comment a little bit, this is a specification that originated in Great Britain. The British utility regulator has taken a favorable view to it. In a way, it kind of takes them off, not off the hook, but they strongly recommended that all the utilities adopt this, and that's, I think, why it's been a little faster to be adopted in the UK than not, because right away the regulator, when they come in to find out about the industries they're regulating, they kind of have a common language. In a way, it's the same benefit that a enterprise gets across its fleet, because you have a common approach, a common framework, a common language, a common assessment methodology. I would guess one reason why the U.S. and the North American regulators haven't latched onto it yet is because it is in a way, and I know you said it isn't, James, but some people still view it because it's sourcing from a British source. Some people do view it as kind of a British standard and wondering, you know, how much input they can have onto it, even though IAM, the organization that's responsible for the writing, is an open and a very transparent organization that, as James is saying, his organization is now associated and has input into the future direction of the specification. So I know I'm kind of rattling on here, but if I was to predict the future, I would say once it gets ISO, and there's an asset management standard through ISO, I would guess that both insurers and regulators would be looking quite favorably, and the companies that adopt now and start putting in the framework now are going to be, in my opinion, way ahead of the curve when that finally starts to come down the pike.
Agreed. And there's no reason to wait either. I mean, the ISO specification for asset management will be based on good and best practices in the industry. And if you look at the PAS-55 specification, it has input from a number of different organizations around the world, and it all makes good common sense, Terry.
Yep. And that's what you keep going back to, and that I'm glad you do, because you're grounding us in just good, simple reality when it comes right down to it. So that's awesome. Our next webinar is October 14th.
Yes, and we're going to take a deep dive into the assessment process. So as Adam mentioned, we've got our endorsed assessor, and we're very proud of that. So we would like to go through the assessment process and talk about the guidelines and the criteria of that. So personally, I'm looking forward to that. Not that really matters.
Me too. No, I am too, and it does, because you're always so enthusiastic about it, and that comes through to us, and we very much. I'm speaking for the audience now. We very much appreciate your passion to
Thanks, Terry.
Good asset management practices. But this is such a new subject, James, that we really need somebody to take us through the way that you have been doing so. So your thought leadership on this is very, very much appreciated. And at Reliability Web, we appreciate the opportunity that you've given us to allow us to kind of present it to our audience out here as well. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks for the kind words, Terry.
I think we got everybody's questions, but we are sending the spreadsheet up to Adam and James. And if for some reason we didn't answer your question, they'll go through them and make sure you do get the questions answered. Go up to apgassetcare.com. Parts 1 through 4 are linked up there already, so you can go up there and see those. And or I'm sorry, 1 through 3 are linked. 4 will be linked not in the not too distant future. You'll be able to, if you haven't seen the first 3, go ahead and watch them, because it does each one does kind of build on each other. Come back and join us on October 14th. We'll have that link up very soon. My first thanks goes to the audience who participated in the polls and gave us time and attention. That really helps James and Adam and the Asset Performance Group, as well as Reliability Web, kind of know where we all are on the polo field. And thank you to James and Adam for sharing, and thank you to the Asset Performance Group for bringing us this great information. Visit www.apgassetcare.com, and if you made requests for information from this presentation and everything, there's an email link at that website you can use to request more specifics. This is Terry O'Hanlon at Reliability Web and Uptime Magazine signing off. Thank you, everybody.